The rain hammered the tarmac at Bagram Airfield like spent brass cascading from a gunship's belly. Major Reese Calloway stood in the tower, staring at the radar screen with the kind of stillness that precedes violence. The blip representing Warthog 7 had vanished 3 minutes ago, swallowed by the Hindu Kush Mountains where Soviet ghosts and Taliban fighters shared the same unforgiving stone. The radio crackled with static, then silence. General Marcus Holt stood behind her, arms crossed, jaw set like a man carved from disappointment. He made his opinion clear in the briefing room 2 hours earlier, sending a close air support pilot into a contested valley with zero air superiority was suicide. Sending Calloway specifically was, in his words, a waste of ordnance and paperwork. She'd ignored him then. She was ignoring him now, listening to the static with the focus of someone reading Braille in a storm. The other officers shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. The general cleared his throat, a sound like gravel in a tin cup. "She's down," he said quietly, almost to himself. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Reese didn't move. Her eyes stayed locked on the empty radar, her hand still hovering over the comms panel. She'd flown with Captain Lyra Voss for 3 rotations. She knew the way Voss breathed when she was lining up a gun run, the subtle click of her jaw when she was calculating angles under fire. She knew that Voss didn't go down easy. The general stepped closer, his voice firm now, laced with authority and something that might have been sympathy. "Major Calloway, begin filing the incident report. I want a full debrief in 20 minutes. Reese's fingers tightened on the edge of the console. Her voice, when it came, was calm, too calm. "Respectfully, sir, not yet." Holt's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me?" Before she could answer, the radio hissed to life. The voice that emerged was ragged, broken by static and pain, but unmistakable. "Bagram, this is Warthog 7. I'm still flying." Every head in the tower snapped toward the speaker. The general froze mid-breath. Reese grabbed the mic, her heart a war drum in her chest. "Warthog 7, say status." The reply took 5 long seconds. "Hydraulics gone. Right engine shredded. GPS is a Christmas tree of failures, but I've got 2 good hands and a plane that won't quit." Reese's eyes flicked to the general, whose face had drained of color. "She's coming home," Reese said, not as a question, but as a fact carved in stone. The tower erupted into controlled chaos. Reese barked orders, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. "Runway crew, scramble. Medical teams, stand by. Fire suppression on full alert." The junior lieutenant at navigation called out wind speed and vectors, his voice shaking with adrenaline. The meteorologist muttered about the ceiling dropping, visibility turning to soup. None of it mattered. Lyra Voss was coming home, and Reese would burn the whole airfield to light her way if she had to. General Holt stepped back, arms falling to his sides. He didn't give orders now. He just watched, a man realizing he'd underestimated the sky itself. Outside, the rain fell harder. Lightning split the darkness, illuminating the mountains in brief, violent flashes. Somewhere out there, an A-10 Thunderbolt II, ugly, angular, designed not for grace but for survival, was clawing its way through a storm with a pilot who refused to die. The radio crackled again. "Bagram, I'm 20 miles out. Can't hold altitude. Gonna be coming in hot and low." Reese's hand tightened on the mic. "Copy, Warthog 7. We've got you. Bring her home." There was a pause, then a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. "Roger that, tower. See you on the ground." Reese set the mic down gently as if it were something sacred. The general moved beside her, his voice low. "I've seen a lot of pilots in my career, Calloway, a lot of good ones, but I've never seen one bring back a plane with no hydraulics through a mountain storm." Reese didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, where the darkness was just beginning to thin. "You're about to, sir." The minutes stretched like hours. The tower fell into a tense, watchful silence broken only by the hum of equipment and the distant rumble of thunder. Reese's mind raced through every scenario, every possible failure point. An A-10 without hydraulics meant manual flight controls, every adjustment a battle of muscle and will. No autopilot, no stability assist. Just the stick, the pedals, and the pilot's ability to read the plane like a living thing. And Lyra Voss could read a plane the way poets read the wind. She'd grown up in the scrublands of West Texas, daughter of a crop duster who taught her to fly before she could drive. Joined the Air Force at 19, bored with the flat earth and hungry for the sky. Flew A-10s because, as she'd once said over whiskey in a Kabul fob, pretty planes are for people who don't know what war looks like. The A-10 was a flying tank, a plane built around a 30-millimeter cannon that could shred armor like paper. It was slow, loud, and beloved by ground troops who knew that when the warthogs showed up, they were going home alive. Radio crackled. Bagram Warthog 7, I have visual on the field, requesting priority landing any runway. Reese's heart slammed against her ribs. Warthog 7, you are cleared for runway 29er, all traffic diverted, the runway is yours. Another voice cut in, gruff and urgent. Warthog 7, this is Crash 1. We've got foam and fire teams standing by. What's your fuel state? There was a long pause. When Voss spoke again, her voice was thin, stretched tight over pain. Fuel's low. Real low, I'm leaking something, not sure what. Gonna make one pass, if I don't stick it I'm ejecting over the field. The general swore under his breath. Reese felt the blood drain from her face. Ejecting over the field meant Voss was done trying to save the plane. It meant she'd given everything she had and was ready to let gravity take the rest. Negative, Warthog 7, Reese said, her voice iron hard. You bring that bird down intact, that's an order. Voss laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Since when do you give me orders, Reese? Since right now, stick the landing, Lyra, that's a direct command from your best friend. Silence. Then quietly, copy that. The first glimpse of the A-10 came as a shadow against the storm, a dark shape emerging from the clouds like something summoned from myth. The plane was barely above the treetops, wobbling, one wing dipped low. Black smoke trailed from the right engine, and even from the tower, Reese could see the jagged holes torn through the fuselage. It looked like something that should have fallen from the sky an hour ago, but it was still flying. The landing gear deployed with agonizing slowness, the hydraulic failure forcing the mechanical backup to grind into place. The nose gear dropped last, locking with a shudder that Reese swore she could feel through the floor of the tower. Gear down, someone whispered, as if speaking too loud might break the spell. The A-10 lined up with the runway, descending in a controlled fall. The engine screamed, a sound like wounded metal, and the plane yawed hard to the left before correcting with a violent jerk. Voss was wrestling the stick with everything she had, fighting the wind, the damaged controls, and the simple physics of a plane that wanted to die. The wheels kissed the tarmac with a screech that echoed across the airfield. The nose gear slammed down, sparks fountaining from the friction. The plane skidded, veering right, then left, before straightening out in a long, shuddering deceleration. Fire trucks roared to life, racing alongside the wounded Warthog as it rolled to a stop 3/4 down the runway. For a moment, nothing moved. The plane sat there, smoke rising, fuel dripping, a monument to defiance and skill. Then the canopy cracked open. Lyra Voss climbed out slowly, one hand pressed to her ribs, her flight suit dark with blood. She dropped to the tarmac, stumbled, caught herself, and looked up at the tower. Even from this distance, Reese could see her smile. The tower erupted in cheers. Men and women who'd held their breath for 20 minutes let it all out in a roar of relief and disbelief. The general just stared, his mouth slightly open, his hands loose at his sides. Reese grabbed her jacket and ran for the door. She hit the tarmac at a dead sprint, boots splashing through puddles, rain soaking through her uniform. Medical teams swarmed Voss, but the pilot waved them off with a weak gesture, her eyes scanning the field. When she saw Reese coming, she straightened, wincing, and raised one hand in a lazy salute. Reese didn't salute back. She grabbed Voss by the shoulders, steadying her, and for a moment they just stood there, two women who'd seen too much sky and too much fire. "You're an idiot," Reese said, her voice shaking. Voss grinned, blood on her teeth. "Yeah, but I'm your idiot." The medics closed in, insistent now, and Voss let them guide her toward the ambulance. But she looked back once, her eyes meeting Reese's across the rain-soaked distance. And in that look was everything they'd never said aloud. The fear, the trust, the unbreakable bond forged in the air where words didn't matter and only survival did. The ambulance doors closed, and Reese stood alone on the tarmac, watching the red lights disappear into the storm. General Holt found her there 10 minutes later, standing in the rain like a statue. He didn't speak right away, just stood beside her, hands in his pockets, staring at the wounded A-10 being towed off the runway. The plane was a wreck, barely recognizable, held together by willpower and spite. "I was wrong," Holt said finally. Reese didn't respond. "I said sending her was a waste. I said she wasn't ready for a contested zone. I was wrong about both." Reese turned to him, rain dripping from her cap. "She's the best pilot in this theater, sir. She always has been." Holt nodded slowly. "I'm starting to see that." He paused, then added, "You trained her, didn't you? 3 years ago, she was green, cocky, thought she knew everything. I broke her down and built her back up. Taught her that flying isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and doing it anyway." The general absorbed that, his face unreadable. "What's her call sign?" "Warthog 7 is just a tail number." Reese smiled faintly, a sad, proud thing. "Her call sign is Phoenix." Holt frowned. "Phoenix, that's a little on the nose, isn't it? She picked it herself after her first deployment, crashed a training sortie, walked away without a scratch and said she felt like she'd been reborn. The squadron laughed, but the name stuck. After tonight, I don't think anyone's laughing." Holt grunted, a sound that might have been agreement. "No, I don't think they are." They stood in the rain a moment longer, then Holt turned to leave. But he stopped, glancing back. "Calloway, you ever think about applying for squadron command?" Reese raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering, sir?" "I'm considering it. You've got a gift for reading people, and you've got the respect of pilots who don't respect easily. That's rare." Reese looked out at the empty runway, the storm beginning to ease, the first faint glow of dawn bleeding through the clouds. "I'll think about it, sir." Holt nodded and walked away, his boots splashing through the puddles. Reese stayed, alone with the sky. The hospital wing at Bagram was a low, concrete building that smelled of antiseptic and exhaustion. Reese found Voss in a bed near the back, ribs taped, left arm in a sling, an IV drip trailing into her hand. She was asleep, her face pale but peaceful, the kind of sleep that comes after the body has burned every reserve and has nothing left to give. Reese pulled up a chair and sat, watching the steady rise and fall of Voss's chest. The doctors had said she'd be fine. Cracked ribs, deep bruising, minor burns from electrical fires in the cockpit. Nothing that wouldn't heal. But Reese knew the wounds that mattered most didn't show on X-rays. She knew because she carried a few herself, scars from missions that hadn't gone according to plan, from friends who hadn't made it home. Flying close air support was a calculus of impossible choices, of dropping ordnance close enough to save lives but not so close you ended them. It was a job that demanded precision, courage, and a willingness to carry the weight of every decision forever. Voss stirred, her eyes fluttering open. She blinked, disoriented, then focused on Reese. "Hey," she croaked. "Hey yourself," Reese replied, leaning forward. "How are you feeling?" Voss grimaced. "Like I got kicked by a mule and then set on fire, but I'm alive, so I'll take it." "You should be dead." Voss smiled faintly. "Yeah, well, I'm stubborn." Reese laughed, a sound caught between relief and exhaustion. "That's an understatement." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the kind of quiet that didn't need filling. Then Voss spoke, her voice soft. "The mission was a success, by the way. I took out 3 gun emplacements and a supply convoy before the SAM hit me. The ground team made it out." Reese's throat tightened. "I know, they radioed in, said you saved their lives." Voss shrugged with her good shoulder. "Just doing my job." "Your job almost got you killed." "Yeah, but it didn't, and that's the difference." Reese wanted to argue, to tell her that luck runs out, that every mission is a gamble and eventually the odds catch up. But she didn't, because Voss knew all that already. Every pilot did. They flew anyway because someone had to, and because the troops on the ground deserved to know that when the sky opened up, it wouldn't rain death on them but salvation. "The general called you the best pilot in the theater," Reese said instead. Voss snorted. "The same general who said I was a waste of paperwork." "The very same. People can change their minds, Lyra, especially when you prove them wrong in spectacular fashion." Voss closed her eyes, a small smile playing on her lips. "Good. Maybe now he'll stop trying to ground me every other mission." Reese didn't answer. She wasn't sure grounding Voss was a bad idea anymore. But she also knew that caging a pilot like Lyra Voss was like trying to hold lightning in a bottle. Possible, maybe, but ultimately pointless. The sky would call, and Voss would answer. The news of Voss's landing spread through Bagram like wildfire. By the next morning, her name was on every tongue, passed from pilot to pilot, mechanic to medic, until it reached the forward operating bases scattered across Afghanistan. Stories grew in the telling, as stories do, but the core remained the same. A pilot, wounded and flying a crippled plane, had brought herself home through a storm that should have swallowed her whole. The A-10 community, a tight-knit group of men and women who flew the ugliest plane in the Air Force with a fierce pride, took the story and made it legend. Voss became a symbol, proof that the Warthog could take a beating and keep fighting, that the pilots who flew it were cut from the same indestructible cloth. In the mess hall, a young lieutenant approached Reese, eyes wide with admiration. "Ma'am, is it true Captain Voss flew 70 miles with no hydraulics?" Reese sipped her coffee, considering. "It's true." "And she landed in a storm." "She did." The lieutenant shook his head in disbelief. "How?" Reese set her cup down, choosing her words carefully. "Because she knew her plane, because she trusted herself, and because she understood that the only way out was through." The lieutenant absorbed that, nodding slowly. "I want to be like her." Reese studied the young officer, seeing in him the same hunger she'd once had, the same need to prove himself in the sky. "Then learn everything you can. Respect your plane, respect your training, and never assume you're invincible. Confidence is good. Arrogance will kill you." The lieutenant saluted and walked away, his steps a little taller, his eyes a little brighter. Reese watched him go, feeling the weight of mentorship settle on her shoulders. It was a weight she'd carried before and would carry again, because that's what good officers did. They passed on what they'd learned, ensured the next generation didn't have to learn every lesson the hard way. Some lessons, yes, but not all. 3 days later, Voss was discharged from the hospital with strict orders to take 2 weeks of medical leave. She ignored them, of course. By the 5th day, she was back in the squadron briefing room, arms still in a sling, ribs taped tight beneath her flight suit. The other pilots greeted her with a mixture of respect and ribbing, the way warriors do when one of their own survives the unsurvivable. "Phoenix, you look like hell," said Captain Rajbat, a wiry man with a grin that could diffuse tension or start a bar fight depending on the situation. Voss flipped him off with her good hand. "You should see the other guy." Laughter rippled through the room, easing the tension that always preceded a mission briefing. The squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Ford, a grizzled veteran with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many friends buried, stepped to the front. "Settle down," he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a drill sergeant's whisper. The room fell silent. Ford's gaze swept over them, landing briefly on Voss. "Good to have you back, Captain." Voss nodded. "Good to be back, sir." Ford tapped the screen behind him, bringing up a topographical map of the Korangal Valley, a place known to soldiers as the Valley of Death. "We've got a situation. Army Special Forces team is pinned down by insurgents in a fortified position. They need close air support, and they need it yesterday. The weather's clearing, but the valley is a hot zone. AAA, possible MANPADS, and tight quarters. This is a knife fight in a phone booth, people." He paused, letting the weight of it settle. "I need 2 warthogs, volunteers." Every hand in the room went up. Ford's eyes flicked to Voss. "You're still on medical leave, Captain." Voss met his gaze without flinching. "I'm here, sir. I'm cleared for duty." "You're not cleared for anything except light duty, and we both know it." "With respect, sir, those troops don't care about my medical status. They care about staying alive, and I'm the best shot you've got for a danger-close gun run." Ford's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue, to pull rank, to do the sensible thing. But he also knew Voss was right. In a tight valley with friendlies close to enemy positions, you didn't want a good pilot, you wanted the best. And despite the sling, despite the bruises still darkening her face, Lyra Voss was the best. "Fine," he said finally. "But you're flying as wingman, not lead. Bat, you've got lead." Bat nodded, his grin fading into focus. "Copy, sir." Ford continued the briefing, laying out the mission parameters, the coordinates, the radio frequencies. Reese, standing at the back of the room, watched Voss's face. She saw the determination there, but also the pain, carefully masked but impossible to hide entirely. After the briefing, she caught Voss in the hallway. "You sure about this?" Voss adjusted her sling, wincing. "No, but I'm going anyway." Reese stepped closer, lowering her voice. If you get yourself killed, I will personally drag you back from the afterlife and kill you again. Voss smiled, a real smile this time, warm and genuine. Deal. The two A-10s took off an hour later, twin engines roaring as they climbed into the pale morning sky. Reese stood on the flight line, hands shoved in her pockets, watching until they were nothing but distant specks against the mountains. She hated this part, the waiting, the not knowing, the faith required to believe that the people you cared about would come back. The radio in the tower crackled to life an hour into the mission. Bat's voice, calm and professional. Bagram, this is Hog 2-1. We are on station and have visual on the target area, preparing for gun run. Another voice, younger, tighter with fear. Hog 2-1, this is Viper 6. We are taking heavy fire from the North Ridge. Request immediate air support, danger close, 100 meters from our position. Reese's breath caught. 100 meters, that was nothing. That was the difference between precision and tragedy. Bat responded immediately. Viper 6 copy, Phoenix, you ready? Voss's voice came through, steady as bedrock. Ready, I've got the North Ridge, you take the western approach. Roger, on my mark, 3-2-1 mark. The sound of the GAU-8 Avenger cannon, the massive 30mm gun that was the heart of the A-10, echoed even over the radio. A sound like the sky tearing itself apart, 65 rounds per second of armor-piercing fury unleashed with surgical precision. Reese closed her eyes, imagining the scene. The two warthogs diving low, skimming the ridgeline, the ground erupting in fire and shrapnel as the insurgent positions disintegrated under the onslaught. The enemy didn't stand a chance. Not against the warthog, not against pilots like Bat and Voss. Viper 6 Hog 2-1, North Ridge is neutralized, how copy? A pause, then a voice choked with relief. Hog 2-1, good copy, you just saved our lives, thank you. Bat's response was crisp. All in a day's work, Viper 6, stay safe. The mission lasted another 20 minutes, the warthogs circling overhead, providing overwatch until the Special Forces team was extracted by helicopter. Then they turned for home, fuel low, ammunition expended, mission accomplished. Reese met them on the tarmac as they taxied to a stop. Bat climbed out first, pulling off his helmet and running a hand through sweat-soaked hair. Hell of a day, he said to Reese. She nodded. Hell of a pilot. Voss climbed down more slowly, favoring her ribs. Her face was pale, sheened with sweat, but her eyes were bright with the kind of adrenaline that came from dancing on the edge and living to tell about it. How'd it go? Reese asked. Voss grinned. Textbook. Bat's getting slow in his old age, though. I had to carry him. Bat laughed. You keep telling yourself that, Phoenix. They walked back together, the three of them, easy camaraderie masking the tension that always followed a mission like that. But Reese saw the way Voss moved, the careful steps, the shallow breathing. She was hurting, badly. You need to see the medics, Reese said quietly. Voss waved her off. I'm fine. You're not fine, you're barely standing. I'm standing, that's what counts. Reese didn't push. She knew when Voss had reached her limit for advice, and when pushing further would only close the door. So she walked beside her in silence, letting her pride have its moment. That night the squadron gathered at the makeshift bar on base, a plywood shack with mismatched chairs and a cooler full of near beer. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, a place to unwind and pretend for a few hours that they weren't living in a war zone. Voss sat at a corner table, nursing a Coke, her sling resting on the table. Pilots drifted over, one by one, shaking her hand, clapping her shoulder, offering quiet words of respect. She accepted it all with grace, deflecting the praise with humor, turning the spotlight back on the team. Reese watched from the bar, a bottle of water in hand, and felt a swell of pride. This was what leadership looked like. Not the loud, brash kind that demanded attention, but the quiet, steady kind that earned it. Ford joined her, leaning against the bar. She's something special, your Captain Voss. Reese nodded. She is. I'm putting her in for a distinguished flying cross. The mission she flew through the storm, bringing that plane back, that's the kind of thing medals are made for. Reese looked at him, surprised. She'll hate that, Ford smiled. Probably, but she's getting it anyway. The weeks that followed took on a strange rhythm. Missions continued, the war ground on, but something had shifted. The squadron moved with a new confidence, a new cohesion. Voss's flight became the stuff of legend, retold in ready rooms and barracks across the theater. She didn't seek the attention, but it found her anyway. Pilots who'd never met her knew her name. Ground troops requested her by call sign. Phoenix became a symbol of the bond between air and ground, the promise that when the sky opened up, salvation would follow. Reese watched the transformation with a mixture of pride and concern. Fame was a double-edged sword in the military. It could inspire, but it could also isolate. She made a point to check in with Voss regularly, to ensure the weight of expectation wasn't crushing her. "You doing okay?" Reese asked one evening, finding Voss alone in the hangar, running her hands over the patched-up fuselage of a new A-10. Voss glanced at her, then back at the plane. "Yeah, just thinking. About how close I came to not making it back, about the troops I've saved and the ones I couldn't, about whether any of it matters in the end." Reese stepped closer, her voice gentle. "It matters. Every life you save, every mission you fly, it all matters." Voss smiled sadly. "Does it? Or are we just delaying the inevitable? This war, it doesn't end, Reese. We just move from one valley to the next, one firefight to the next. And for what?" Reese didn't have an easy answer. She'd asked herself the same question more times than she could count. "For the people who go home because of us. For the soldier who sees his kid again because we kept him alive one more day. It's not the big picture, Lyra. It's the small one, the individual moments. That's where meaning lives." Voss considered that, her hand resting on the cold metal of the plane. Yeah, okay. I can work with that." They stood together in the dim light of the hangar, two women shaped by the sky and the choices it demanded. And in that silence there was understanding. The Distinguished Flying Cross ceremony was held on a windy afternoon in late spring. The entire squadron stood in formation, dress uniforms crisp, medals gleaming. Voss stood at attention, her face unreadable as General Holt pinned the medal to her chest. The citation was read aloud, detailing her actions with clinical precision. The damage sustained, the flight conditions, the successful landing. But the words couldn't capture the reality of it, the terror and the triumph, the sheer force of will required to do what she'd done. When it was over, the squadron erupted in applause. Voss saluted, her expression carefully neutral, but Reese saw the flicker of emotion in her eyes. Pride, yes, but also something deeper. A recognition that she'd crossed a threshold, that she was no longer just another pilot, but something more. Afterward, as the crowd dispersed, Reese found Voss standing alone, staring at the medal in her hand. "Congratulations," Reese said. Voss looked up, smiled faintly. "Thanks, it's heavier than I expected." "That's the weight of responsibility. It comes with the territory." Voss nodded, pocketing the medal. "I guess it does." Months passed. The war continued its relentless churn, but the squadron adapted, evolved. Voss flew more missions, each one adding to her legend. She became the pilot others wanted to fly with, the one ground commanders requested by name. Her call sign, Phoenix, became synonymous with resilience and skill, but with the legend came the burden. Every mission carried the weight of expectation, the knowledge that people were counting on her not just to succeed, but to be extraordinary. Reese saw the toll it took, the way Voss's smiles came less frequently, the way her eyes grew distant during briefings. One evening she found Voss sitting on the edge of the flight line, watching the sun set over the mountains. "Mind if I join you?" Reese asked. Voss gestured to the ground beside her. "Be my guest." They sat in silence, watching the sky turn from gold to crimson to deep purple. Finally, Voss spoke. "I'm tired, Reese, not physically, just tired." Reese didn't respond immediately. She let the words settle, understanding the vulnerability it took to admit them. "What do you want to do?" Voss shrugged. "I don't know, keep flying, I guess. It's all I know how to do." "That's not true. You could teach, you could lead, you have options." Voss turned to her, eyes serious. "Do I? Or am I just a symbol now? Phoenix, the pilot who won't die, who can't fail. What happens when I do?" Reese met her gaze steadily. "Then you get back up, just like you always have." The mission that changed everything came on a cold November morning. Intelligence reported a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for numerous attacks on coalition forces, holed up in a compound near the Pakistani border. The window for the strike was narrow, the risks high. Voss was assigned as lead. She and Bat took off at dawn, the sky clear and cold, visibility perfect. Reese listened to the radio chatter from the tower, tracking their progress across the map. The initial approach went smoothly. Voss's voice calm and professional as she identified the target, confirmed coordinates with the ground team. Bagram Hog 2-1, we have visual on the compound, preparing for strike. Copy Hog 2-1, you are cleared hot. There was a pause, then Voss again, her voice tight. Wait, I see civilians, children in the courtyard, abort, abort. Reese's heart clenched. Bat responded immediately. Phoenix, confirm, you have eyes on civilians. Affirmative. Multiple children, maybe 5 or 6. They're playing near the target building. We cannot engage. The radio crackled as higher command cut in, a voice Reese didn't recognize, sharp and impatient. Hog 2-1, this is Overwatch. You are cleared to engage. Acceptable collateral. Voss's reply was ice. Negative, Overwatch, I will not fire on children. The argument that followed was tense, voices clipping over each other. Command insisted the target was too important, the risk of waiting too high. Voss held firm, her voice never wavering. I said negative, find another way. Reese listened, her admiration for Voss growing with every refusal. This was the line, the place where following orders ended and conscience began. Voss was willing to face a court-martial rather than kill innocents. Finally, command relented, ordering the warthogs to hold position and wait for the civilians to clear. 20 agonizing minutes passed. Then Voss's voice, calm once more. Civilians have cleared the area, engaging now. The strike was textbook perfect. The compound erupted in fire and debris, the target eliminated. But the mission's success was overshadowed by the argument, by the stand Voss had taken. Back at base, she was summoned to the command office. Reese waited outside, packing, fearing the worst. When Voss emerged an hour later, her face was unreadable. What happened? Reese asked. Voss shrugged. Got a lecture on the chain of command, but no formal reprimand. I think they know it would have been bad PR to punish me for not killing kids. Reese exhaled in relief. You did the right thing. Voss looked at her, exhaustion etched in every line of her face. Did I, or did I just make my life harder? Both, Reese said honestly. But that's the price of integrity, and you paid it. Word of the incident spread quickly. Once again, Voss found herself at the center of a story, but this time the tone was different. Some praised her moral courage. Others questioned her judgment, argued she'd endangered the mission, put personal feelings above military necessity. The squadron was divided, conversations tense and guarded. Reese found herself defending Voss in ways she hadn't anticipated, arguing with senior officers who felt the pilot had overstepped. She followed the rules of engagement, Reese said during one particularly heated meeting. She saw a situation that violated those rules and acted accordingly. That's exactly what we trained them to do. A major she didn't know well, a desk officer who'd never flown combat, scoffed. She hesitated. In combat, hesitation gets people killed. Reese's eyes hardened. She didn't hesitate, she made a decision, and it was the right one. If you can't see the difference, then maybe you shouldn't be making decisions about pilots. The room went silent. The major flushed but didn't respond. The meeting ended shortly after, the tension unresolved. Later, Ford pulled Reese aside. You're putting your career on the line for her. Reese met his eyes. I know, but she'd do the same for me. That's what this is about, sir. Loyalty, trust. The things that actually matter. Ford studied her for a long moment, then nodded. All right, I'll back you, but Calloway, you need to understand that the higher-ups are watching. They see Voss as a potential problem, too independent, too willing to question orders. You tie yourself to her and you tie yourself to that perception. Reese considered that, then shrugged. Then so be it. I'd rather stand with someone who does the right thing than climb by stepping on people who do. Ford smiled faintly. You're a good officer, Calloway. Don't let anyone tell you different. The controversy eventually faded, replaced by new crises, new missions. But the incident left a mark, a reminder that the line between hero and pariah was thinner than most people realized. Voss carried it quietly, flying her missions, doing her job, but the light in her eyes had dimmed. Reese watched, worried but didn't know how to help. Some wounds didn't heal with words. The deployment ended in the spring. The squadron rotated back to the States, to a base in Arizona where the desert sun felt nothing like the mountains of Afghanistan. Voss threw herself into training exercises, flying with the same precision but less joy. Reese, now promoted to squadron commander, tried to draw her out, but Voss had built walls that were hard to breach. One evening, Reese found her in the hangar, working on an A-10's engine long after everyone else had gone home. "You don't have to do this," Reese said, leaning against the fuselage. Voss looked up, grease on her hands, a wrench in one. "I know I want to." "Why?" Voss set the wrench down, wiped her hands on a rag. "Because planes don't judge. They don't care about your decisions or your reputation. They just need you to know what you're doing, and if you do, they'll fly." Reese stepped closer. "People aren't that different, Lyra. They need you to know what you're doing too, and you do, you always have." Voss smiled sadly. "Do I? Some days I'm not so sure." Reese didn't have an answer for that. Doubt was part of the job, the cost of carrying responsibility. All she could offer was presence, the quiet assurance that Voss wasn't alone. Time passed. Voss continued to fly, her skills undiminished, her reputation intact despite the controversy. She mentored younger pilots, passing on the lessons she'd learned, the hard truths about flying and fighting and choosing when to pull the trigger. Reese watched her grow into the role, becoming not just a pilot but a leader. The kind of leader who led by example, who earned respect through action, not words. Years later, Reese stood in the same tower at Bagram, older now, grayer but still sharp. The war had changed, the players different, but the mission remained the same. Provide support, save lives, bring everyone home. A new generation of pilots flew the Warthogs now, but Voss's name still echoed through the ready rooms, a legend passed down like a torch. Reese heard the stories, embellished and exaggerated, but always rooted in truth. The pilot who flew through a storm, the pilot who wouldn't fire on children. The pilot called Phoenix, who rose from every trial stronger than before. One day, a package arrived at Reese's office. Inside was a photograph, slightly faded, showing a young Voss standing beside an A-10, grinning like she'd just conquered the world. On the back, in Voss's handwriting, were the words, "Thanks for believing when no one else did. Phoenix." Reese set the photo on her desk, beside the others she'd collected over the years. Faces of pilots she'd trained, commanded, lost. Each one a story, a life that had intersected with hers in the vast, unforgiving sky. She thought about legacy, about what it meant to leave something behind. Not medals or commendations, though those had their place, but something deeper. The knowledge that you'd made a difference, that the people you'd touched carried a piece of you forward. Voss had that legacy now. It lived in every pilot who heard her story and decided to be better, braver, more willing to stand for what was right. It lived in the troops who'd gone home because she'd been overhead when they needed her most. And it lived in Reese, in the pride she felt knowing she'd helped shape a pilot who'd become a symbol of everything the job should be. The general's words from that rainy night years ago echoed in her mind. She's down. But Voss hadn't been down. She'd been fighting, clawing her way back through the storm, refusing to let the sky claim her. And in that refusal, in that defiant act of survival, she'd shown everyone what it meant to be Phoenix. Not the mythical bird that rose from ashes, but a pilot, human and flawed and extraordinary, who chose to rise every single time the world tried to knock her down. Reese stood and walked to the window, looking out at the flight line where A-10s sat like sleeping dragons, waiting for their next mission. The sky above was clear, vast and endless, full of promise and danger. And somewhere out there, Voss was flying. Maybe over a desert, maybe over a mountain range, maybe over the same storm-tossed valleys where her legend had been born. But she was flying. And as long as pilots like her kept taking to the sky, as long as they kept choosing courage over comfort, duty over ease, the legacy would endure. Phoenix would rise, again, and again, and again.